à tous, bienvenue, installez-vous.
Hello, welcome. Take your seats for this controversy on a burning topic to increase the temperature. Grandpa boomers, a burden on economies. I'm Pierre Boyer. I'm a teacher in economics in the Polytechnic School, and I'm a researcher also in CEPR. And we have two speakers, high-quality speakers, who will tell us about what they feel in view of their experience. Magda Tomasini is at the head of the National Institute for Demographic Studies, which is an observatory coordinating research on demography in France, and Bruno Angle, who is the CEO of AG2R La Mondiale, a company that supports and insures individuals, and which is also the French leader of insurance companies, at least in 2022. Let's start with Magda. Well, thank you. Yes, the population is aging. In 2050, 1 person out of 6 on this planet will be over 65. For Europe and France and the US, it will be 1 out of 4. Since 2018, the over 65 are now in greater number than the under 65. France cannot escape this movement. We have 1 person out of 4 in France that is over 60. If you compare to the rest of Europe, France is rather not in a bad situation. France is rather younger than Italy, with a fecundity rate of 1:2. But let's not forget that in France, the regions are not uniformly distributed. In some areas, apart from aging faster than the rest of the country, the equipment for elderly people is not as dense, with less carers and less health agents, like in the Virgin Islands, in the Martinique and Guadeloupe, for example. In terms of economics, the economic level of the over 60 is close to that of people working. They consume a lot of goods and services. They have some economic power, possibilities of investing, and they also have a potential, which is more difficult to measure, in terms of supporting youngsters and supporting the younger generations and committing into associations. Thank you very much. Bruno, let's all realize that we are on the eve of a major demographic shock. Why? Well, I'm not a demographer, but it's easy to understand. 75 years ago, we had what was called the baby boom. And this wave has been propagating over the past 75 years. It was predictable, but it was not properly anticipated. And it means that 75 years later, the baby boomers have become grandpa boomers. And this is due to the baby boom and the lengthening of life. Thanks to these two elements, we end up in a situation where overall, if you compare to a few years ago, the number of people in France who age beyond 75 is being multiplied by a factor of 4 or 5. By 2026, we'll have over 1 million people who will be over 75. So this represents a major challenge for us, which is probably one of the most important challenges with that of climate for the younger generations. It's not necessarily bad news, because if you live longer, obviously it has its good sides. We live longer in a society that will have 4 generations living together. So we'll have 4 generations coexisting. So it's good news in a way, because it means that more and more great-grandparents will be lucky to know their great-grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will be lucky enough to know their great-grandparents. So that's good news, but these good news come together with a number of challenges in terms of offer of services, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of funding. Thank you for these elements. Before I take the questions from the audience, I would like Magda to tell us about the financial challenges of those issues. Dres considers that we would have to be able to host an additional 100,000 elderly people more in the establishment, specialized establishments. Well, when we talk about aging, we talk a lot about pensions, but there's also the policy for support. According to the research on dependence prepared by Dres, in 2014, dependence represented more or less 1% of the GDP. By 2060, this figure will represent over 2% of the GDP. And so these are huge financial amounts. And it seems that according to the projections and the macroeconomic hypotheses are not helping much. We know we have Jean-Michel Charpak in this room, and I know that the funding of dependence is an old topic. He used to take care of the reflection group in 2010 on the first laws on this topic when Roselyne Bachelot was minister. So it involves a number of sectors, health, concerning the pathologies, families, housing, and some invisible costs, for example, like a tax support, which is rather important. So these various instruments of public policy are being solicited, and we have to work on them. Well, very well. Thank you very much for these elements. The amounts are huge. One reaction. Bruno, you said that this challenge of aging was predictable but hadn't been anticipated. The grandpa boomer generation, which held great responsibilities in the private and public sector, is now managing its assets. Could you say that they are a generation of people who were irresponsible? No, that's not what I would say. The idea is not to have a burden weighing on this generation, which, if you look at the progresses accomplished in the past 75 years, these people have been helping society and the country to develop. But without criticizing, we can't absolve them totally, because there was a part that could be anticipated in all that. And the time we now have to give answers to this wave, demographic wave, is being reduced. And I believe there was a lack of anticipation. Why did I say that this is the most important challenge with that of climate? Well, I believe that the good news is that you can correct the issue of aging well faster than the issue of climate. Because for climate, the non-decision making process or the wrong decisions of the past make it very difficult to correct things. But for aging well, we can consider that we still have a possibility to act, which is the reason why, as the general manager of AG2R La Mondiale, I rang a warning bell a few months ago, in a constructive manner, saying that we have to all work together, because when you're faced with such a challenge, there's no magic solution, no panacea to solve everything. I believe the answers should come from a panel of stakeholders, including the state, territorial communities, private companies, and citizens. Everybody must be mobilized. You have to have a notion of general mobilization if you look at this issue of aging well. And we need a range, a number of tools in order to show more regard and more value for carers, whether you talk about professional ones or family ones. I was faced with that situation, and my father was in such a situation 2 years ago, and I could see how my mother, as a family helper, was faced with so much problem. And Mrs. Bourguignon, when she talked about 350,000 people, mentioned that. What did we do to face the challenge? Not sufficiently, not sufficient, not enough, sorry. So amongst our citizens, some people want collective solutions and others prefer to stay at home. But as a society, we must be able to give an answer in both cases. For people who are looking for collective solution, you have the senior service residents, which are far away from the EHPADs. These residences are for people who are valid and who are looking for a secure environment with a number of services. The EHPADs are for people who are no longer autonomous and who need care. AG2R became top shareholder of Domitis, which is the main senior service residence actor in France. But AG2R and Agir Carco are offering diagnosis, for example, which for 15 euros enable you to assess the adaptation if you want to stay at home. So 15 euros is something that everybody can pay. And when you talk about the work, the order of magnitude is about 10,000 euros. It can be very little for some, very much for others, which leads me to the last part of the solutions, which is the financial part. Something was set up with the PAC law, which is the retirement savings plan for youngsters who want to take care sufficiently early of this. If at the age of 30 you start putting 100 euros a month, you'll have 75,000 euros when you retire. But as a PACT is a recent law, it's not true. But you can think of solutions like the partial monetization of the real estate of seniors citizens, which is a form of solution which is more sophisticated in terms of the options, and which is more ethical than what we call viager, which is selling a form of selling until the person dies. So one last question from me for both of you. We talked about demography, about finance, but obviously you have the issue of justice when you think about the generation of baby boomers. We know you said that 4 generations would have to coexist, including 2 generations that are retired. And Magda, you said there was a difference between the metropolis and the other areas. Can you tell us what we can do to avoid conflict? Magda, let me get back to the West Indies example, because accelerated aging is something that can be an indicator of what's going to happen in mainland France. This is the result of research called Immigration, Family and Aging, which we carried out. And this phenomenon of accelerated migration, which we note in the West Indies, is due to a drop in fecundity of women, 2 children per woman, still higher than in the metropolis. And it's also due to the loss of active populations because of youngsters leaving for mainland France. So you lose some active population, and those who stay are those with little diploma. And 60% of the children under the age of 10 have had an episode of single parenthood, and half of them have only known a single parent. So if you look at the destiny of women in Guadeloupe and Martinique, they have to raise their children on their own and take care of their parents, all that in context of economic scarcity. So we have to think of policies in terms of so the social policy must be a global policy and not only targeting the elders. Well, I would look at the issue of justice under the generation aspect. I personally think, and I probably at the end of the baby boom, I was born in '64, so I'm at the end of this comet of the baby boom, of the baby boomers. But I believe we have de facto given 2 debts to the youngsters, 3,000 billions for France, plus an environmental debt. And if there was a way to funding properly the good, proper aging and dependency, it would be fairer, probably. Well, we have 8 minutes left and 17 seconds for questions from the audience. Please introduce yourselves and ask short questions. The speakers have promised they would give short answers. Sir. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Where's the microphone, please? Obviously, I'm a grandpa boomer. One question, madam. Please reassure me, is our life expectancy still stabilized at 86 or 87, despite the number of people who are over 100 years? And, sir, I'm not so sure that the cohabitation of 4 generations is such a good thing. Well, for the life expectancy question, you will probably remember that we had a pandemic. So there was a movement of increase in life expectancy, but this has stopped. So we will need more time to check whether the impact, or let's say the step that we've reached in terms of life expectancy is linked to the COVID pandemic or not. Bruno, 4 generations together. Well, the title of the new format is Controversies, so it's very good that we should not agree. I think that living longer is something that is a chance. So in what state? Up till now, there's been, I'm not a doctor, but reasonably, we tend to say that the last 2 years are the more difficult ones. So if we have more life expectancy, we tend to live longer in good health. In my opinion, it's a chance, but it sends us back to a number of challenges that we have to solve together. Sir, let me be a bit provocative. We are talking about an ultra-liberal economy here. Elderly people are costly. What do you think of creating concentration camps and canceling or getting rid of all these people who are not bringing in any money? So obviously I'm being provocative, but sometimes this is what's happening. Now, listening to you and thinking back of what I've gone through in my life, it's not that funny, because in practice it's not what you're saying. the elderly people are being ill-treated nowadays, and this is serious. The investigations on EHPADs, you can read the research and the report, they are a disaster. They're being ill-treated. So it's all very well. We've lived 45, 50 years in the active population. Now we're good to be set aside. And I believe we should review the way in which we look at the topic. Elderly people can bring a lot, if only through their experience via in the companies, in administrations. They shouldn't be thrown away. They have a value. And I would like you to take this value into account. Thank you. We did say how lucky it was to have the coexistence of several generations. I don't think that's what we said. I did remind you that there was this economic weight of the senior citizens, but also the economic driver, because they can invest. And also because when you get to the end of your life cycle, you usually have some assets and you have invested in economics. I have reminded people about the role of the support of other generations and of the commitment to associations. I don't think we have a negative vision of aging. Bruno. Well, there would be a lot of answers to give you. Personally, I can commit the Groupe AG2R La Mondiale without consulting my board. I'm against concentration camps. But a second point, very sincerely, in a country with 57% compulsory payments for social payments, I don't think this is ultra-liberal. Now, talking about the problems in the EHPADs, I don't have any EHPADs in my group. In the resident service senior, the rate of satisfaction of the residents is around 97%. So everybody has to take their responsibility in their sector, but I don't think you should generalize. The surveys that were published a year ago concerning some EHPADs, and in particular one group of EHPADs, and I believe this would be unfair. Thank you for this answer, madam. Yes, Catherine Marchetti-Safic. I'm an advisor in CSR strategy. Thank you for your interventions. I wanted to ask, don't you think there is a risk of opposing the various ongoing transitions, digital, demographic, and ecological, because they all require quite a lot of investments, and it might be interesting also, and I'm giving you my opinion there, it might be interesting to include in this transition the major social element. Bruno, well, excellent question, I must say. For me, it's quite simple. They shouldn't be opposed. We have two challenges ahead of us, that of climate as that of aging in good conditions. And to say things as people tend to say, we want both cheese and dessert, and to say it as our political authorities tend to say, it has to take place. Both things have to be done simultaneously, en même temps, as Mr. Macron said. So, Magda. Well, first of all, the young generation shouldn't think that by having no children, they're going to solve the climatic issues, because that's going to increase the demographic challenges. Hello, I'm Mr. Garcia. I have a question. A grandpa boomer has an economic weight. I would like to have some figures as to the support that they represent, because they're a major factor of consumption. It's true that they can be costly. Maybe you could give us a few figures. Well, Bruno and Magda, well, I haven't got the figures, I must say, but if you look at the accounts per category of household. But once again, as I said, the title of the controversy was provocative. We knew that history was not going along those lines. The title of this controversy is that of the Cercle des Économistes, but I don't think that any of the people who spoke here on stage talked about the weight of this generation. Thank you, Bruno Wang, le General Manager of AG2R La Mondiale, and Magda Tomasini.